Hey everyone, Chief here. So this is the third take of the first episode of the Day 1 series. And this time it's for real. Go or no go, I'm not deleting everything. We stood up a new channel. I wasn't aware that you could do channels, create channels that are org channels. So I finally figured out how to do that. So we have just the straight up Hacker Happy Hour channel on YouTube now. The previous two episodes I'll leave on the old My Chief page on YouTube, but for all intents and purposes, this will serve as episode 1. For anyone who watched the previous two episodes of Day 1, which we're doing ember.js, I am changing the app. So what we're going to do is dive into ember.js and try to build an app with it. That is definitely not the ember.js website. And at this point, I've had about 3 hours of hands-on with Ember, so I'm very fresh with it. I've pretty much run this guide. If you go to guides, the getting started installing Ember, that's pretty much as far as I've been able to do that. As far as I've gone so far, is this Ember new, my app. I had some issues with it, so finally got it installed. And as of right now, I am using Node version 0.12 instead of version 4. And let me share my screen because you all want to know what I'm talking about. I had to install NVM to downgrade my Node instance in order to run on the Mac. So, CD. What I'm going to do is, from this point right here, the very first step, we're gonna create an app called Get Scored. And the premise behind Get Scored is this. One of my fellow Hacker Happy Hour programmers was chatting with me this morning, and he's diving into JavaScript for the first time from the Node.js perspective. So he's really getting into the serious JavaScript for the first time. And he sent me a list of things that he's perceived as pros and cons so far. And one of the things that he said that really struck home with me was that there's a lot of it's starting to get bogged down, the community. If you go to npmjs.org and you search for a module, for example, HTTP or TCP or something basic, something that is a core fundamental for most apps, you'll wind up with 100, 200 results, and it can be really difficult to assess what your best option is very quickly. You wind up having to do some digging around, some research. Best case scenario, you'll spend 10 minutes on it probably to really do due diligence. Worst case scenario, there have been times where I've had to spend about a day a piece evaluating one or two or three, if there's three really good options. And you look at things like the number of downloads per day, per month, when it was last published. So just to give you a quick idea, one of the ones that I was recently searching for was a TCP-based module to do some tunneling, server-to-server tunneling for TCP. And there were a ton of results. And what makes it difficult is there is a lot of node modules where you don't have the 1.0.0. A lot of node modules out there have been out there for 1-2 years, and they're actively maintained, but they still haven't reached their 1.0. So it's hard to tell just by version alone whether or not the code is actually usable. As in 80% of the cases, usable modules won't even have a major version number yet. They'll still be 0. And here's a module where it's 1.0 and it's only got 7 downloads in the last week, 27 in the last month. And if you know who Isaac is, was one of the maintainers of npm.js for the longest time. He's still involved, but for the longest time he was kind of the shepherd of npm itself. And this is just tcp.js. You see people are downloading this module, and it's just a require module for a net core. Evaluating other results, you can go back and you can see the number of stars something has, and a lot of times people don't star modules for JavaScript. When you take this out, a lot of times these link to different GitHub repositories. So let's take one that I'm actually kind of close to. I've been helping to maintain it a little bit recently, is Reflux. So Reflux.js. And you see here, Reflux.js has 3,800 stars, and it's been out there for a little over a year now. And by all intents and purposes, if you were to search for it, this is inspired by the Flux pattern. If you were to search for Flux alternatives to just the vanilla Flux that Facebook has, Reflux.js would probably come up at the top of your list. However, if you look at these build information, you can see that builds are failing. It has compatibility issues across the board. There are a lot of things that need to be updated in it, and for all intents and purposes, the project's kind of been abandoned. There's only 2 maintainers, myself and Mikhail from Sweden, or Norway, I think. And neither one of us have had a lot of time to work on this. You can see the last update was 2 months ago, and it's got a lot of problems with it. It's very popular with stars and forks and such because it was pretty much the first of its kind. So it came out right after the Flux model was introduced by Facebook, and it had a very simple approach to what I think is overly complicated architecture for Flux. It doesn't lend itself really well to the design pattern that it's intended to use, and Reflux really had a good approach to that. So the whole point of this is, if you were to look at, say, a list of Reflux.js and 10 alternatives, you might think, just by some of the basic first glance pieces of data that you have to evaluate a project, without looking at code, without experimenting with it, you might rate it as the #1 alternative to get started with. In reality, I wouldn't recommend that anyone choose Reflux.js in its current state over a lot of the other vanilla Flux or Flux-inspired backend architecture libraries out there. And what the intent and purpose of Get Scored is to have a site where you can go to, and you'll log in with your GitHub account, and you can score a project. So you'd be able to say, go to the Reflux.js page on Get Scored, and you'd be able to add points to Reflex.js for different categories like documentation, code clarity, maintenance and upkeep, a few things like that. And the end result would be, from all the community feedback on a library, it would be able to score an application. So it would kind of be a weighted opinion from the community, something that you'd be able to more quickly, at a glance, compare if you had two results come up, say in a GitHub search or in an npm.js search. You'd be able to more quickly narrow down or sort what the most useful features are. So of all of those packages out there, of all those projects out there, there's so much clutter, so many of them that are named almost identical and serve the same purposes, but they're in various different states. Some are maintained and abandoned. It's what the idea of Get Scored is, to be able to immediately cut through that and help identify your top candidates for endorsement. So if you need a module for doing asynchronous cross-domain AJAX type requests, there's got to be like 1,000 libraries out there. With Get Scored, you would be able to quickly see the top 3. You'd probably show up with jQuery and SuperAgent and Axios and a few others. You'd be able to very quickly see that they would have much higher scores than other libraries that aren't adopted, endorsed, supported, or favored by the community. So we are going to use Ember to create the front-end tool for this. And the first thing that we're going to do is use the Ember CLI. So I have Ember CLI version 1.13.8 running on Node 0.12.7 using npm 2.13. And I'm going to type Ember new Get Scored. Okay, so we have installed the app, and now we can go to cd Get Scored, and you'll see we look in here and we've got our app scaffolded out. So this works the Ember CLI. So I ran an npm install -g Ember CLI to get the Ember command line tool, and then using that, I generated this scaffold. It's similar if you've ever used Yeoman, pretty similar to Yeoman. What I'm going to do now is add a remote. And we can see here that this project is now on GitHub. You can see that's a blank project. And there is this basic app.js index.html and router.js. So this is as far as I've gone offline. So from this point forward, everything I do is brand new. And where I'm going to start is I've had a chat with a coworker, and the guides for ember.js, I think there's still a lot of version 1.0 pieces in here because they're not completely deprecated out of the application yet. So what we want to focus on is components and services. And we want to avoid controllers and routes for the most part. So we'll have components that are actually like route components. We'll have a routing component. And if you've ever used React, it's probably going to be similar to that, as far as I would guess. The other thing that I want to try to enable is angle bracket syntax. So from what I've heard from talks Eric Bryn has given, is that the angle bracket syntax, for all intents and purposes, is very similar to JSX. And that feature is in the Canary build of Ember. Where is... So it looks like what I want to do here is somehow install Ember 2.1. Hmm. This is interesting. I kind of figured. So what this is actually asking us to do here is um, so basically, this is just asking us to use the latest versions of Ember, which are 2 and Ember data. I'm not quite sure what Ember and Ember data the differences are yet, or where each piece runs. Maybe Ember data is a piece that runs in Node. Either way, we're about to find out how well that worked. So localhost 4200. And there we go. Okay. I'm just reading some of the ember.js 2.x stuff. It looks like there's a lot of talk about angle bracket support, and there is, as of yet, no angle bracket support. Um, I don't like the idea of using templates, but let's just do regular components, and we'll change it over when we get the chance. So, um, excuse me. I am now reading the Ember 2.0 guide for components, and let's try to create a. So, the first thing that we're probably going to want to tackle is a basic layout and user authentication. So, we're probably going to do OAuth 2 authentication with a GitHub account. So, we could look for a Ember add-on, I'm guessing, for OAuth. So one thing's becoming immediately clear is that a lot of JavaScript libraries have a quick 1, 2, 3, and you're kind of away and running. They're very hackable. Ember is clearly not that. Now I say that with some skepticism. I've got a lot of experience with Angular, a fair amount of experience with React, backbone experience, and all of them have a quick, hey, get started doing this, and 10 minutes later you can be coding. In reality, you probably are going to wind up spending a good 10 to 15 hours minimum to kind of get your feel for that framework's way of doing things. So what I mean when I say Ember is not your jump in and get hacking type of tool is it doesn't really allow you to do just general basic hacking without first doing, excuse me, a good deal of study up front. So what I'm doing here is very off the hip. It's probably not what you want to do. Ember's probably not your best day one type of um, not your first day one type of application framework. Let's try to just make a quick component. So inside the edit app templates, here's our application component. Let's do app templates components. What would be a good component to start with? Let's say project. And components are right now handlebar templates because that angle bracket syntax isn't yet here. So we'll have to create a project.hbs for the component and say div class equals project. Just do something simple here. Components must have at least one dash in their name. So project is not an acceptable component name. So let's actually save that and we'll rename it. say GitHub projects or Git projects. Move app components projects. Call it Git project. So here's what I don't get. Components. There's an app components. There's an app templates components. So it's like the right way according to the docs. Components project.hbs. All right, well, I'm going to cut things off here, not spend any more time broadcasting me reading docs. It's pretty evident that that's what I have to do. From what I'm reading, initial impressions, I'll just say I can't wait until angle brackets components make it into Ember. Ember 2.0 did not ship with angle bracket components, and I haven't seen anything that says they're released yet. Ember 2.1 is not yet released. And the component structure with the MVC pattern. So Ember, this is where I watched a talk that Eric Brin gave, and Ember, the way they do versioning is a little bit different than other projects. So they moved to version 2 even before a lot of the things that they wanted for version 2 were out there. It's kind of like they're just moving the versions along, and it's based, I think, on stability. And a lot of the things that they wanted, the direction they wanted to take with Ember 2.0, a move away from the MVC pattern, a move towards a unidirectional data flow, move towards basic ES6. It looks like, even though they reached Ember 2.0 version, none of those things are actually in it yet. With that being said, I'm probably going to still work on this get scored application. Will probably just be in a different library for now. So stay tuned for live broadcasts of that. And I will say that the Ember 2.0 stuff that is planned, the angle brackets and et cetera, that we've talked about, does look fairly interesting. As things stand right now, Ember version 2 doesn't look any different from Ember version 1 from a composability standpoint, and it seems very difficult to do simple things with. There's a lot of overhead in just doing add a simple element to a page or something like that. For that reason, I'm not going to continue doing day one hacks with ember.js until that 2.1 drop. I think the series should focus on things that are very hackable topics, and I think ember.js version 1/2.0 is a little bit of a too broad of a topic, whereas Ember 2.1 looks to be, if everything goes as planned, more of an acceptable topic. So leave your comments and feedback. Let me know if you're interested in seeing that Ember 2.1 day one live broadcast. And let me know if you would like to see a day one broadcast of any other programming language, framework, etc. Cheers.